مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. تمتلك كامالا هاريس الطاقة والحماسة ولديها الكثير من المال، ولكن الرغم من كل الروايات حول فشل دونالد ترامب في إيجاد استراتيجية فعالة ضد هذه المرشحة الديمقراطية الجديدة، لا يزال ترامب يظهر نتائج أفضل في استطلاعات الرأي في هذه المرحلة من الحملة مقارنة بنتائجه ضد هيلاري كلينتون في عام 2016 وفي جو بايدن في عام 2020. كيف سيتمكن دونالد ترامب المدعوم بقاعدة قوية ومخلصة من إيجاد أصوات إضافية كافية للفوز بالانتخابات؟ هل يحتاج إلى المزيد من الناخبين المؤيدين أم إلى إثارة الشكوك حول هاريس؟ هل ستتمكن هاريس من المحافظة على الاستراتيجية الفخ والتفاؤل التي اتبعتها في الشهر الماضي، أم أنها ستبدأ في الرد على هجمات ترامب بهجمات مضادة؟ لمناقشة استراتيجيات السياسية للمرشحين في الأسابيع الأخيرة من الحملة الانتخابية، يسعدني أن أستضيف نخبة من الخبراء السياسيين دانيال ليبمان، تود جيلمان وأنا جيراتيلي. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Let's take a close look at the briefest, quickest, most compressed presidential election in modern times. In just a few weeks, a few themes have quickly become conventional wisdom. Anna Giratelli, Todd Gilman, Daniel Lippman, let's take a close look to see if they're accurate. Here's one. Kamala Harris has the enthusiasm, momentum, energy, and lots of money, and that is a winning formula. Daniel, is that accurate?
Eventually, sometimes all of the money piles up and they're having to give money to the down ballot races. And so they've given $25 million from their own campaign funds to try to win back the House and keep the Senate in Democratic hands. And so there comes a point of diminishing returns. But most candidates, that's a good problem to have. And they feel like that there's so much more energy and volunteers on their side compared to Trump's. And this is in huge contrast to what the Democratic establishment and voters were feeling like during the Biden campaign when everyone thought he was going to lose. And he couldn't say a single thing right.
All right. That's one conventional wisdom. Here's another one that I read a lot about. Donald Trump, the man who figured out how to defeat the heavily favored Hillary Clinton, is foundering and hasn't figured out how to confront Kamala Harris. Anna, when you look at the campaign, is that an accurate new conventional wisdom?
Well, Donald Trump is having a lot of trouble right now. We've seen Kamala come in, and interestingly, Trump had a huge lead, double-digit lead over Kamala in terms of who voters would select for immigration, who would be better on the issue, what's going on at the southern border in particular. And what we're seeing in the last few weeks is Kamala Harris making a really incredible comeback. That's down to a single-digit lead now, and some polls it's gone from Trump being up 14% to 3%, only being up by that much now. And really, that's Kamala Harris's message on immigration and the border. She's staying very vague, but really appealing to moderates, and certainly stealing Trump's kind of thunder on one of his primary issues for the past decade.
So, Todd, if these are the new conventional wisdoms, do they tell us the story of the 2024 campaign?
Well, all the polls are only a snapshot, as the strategists always say. The only poll that really counts is on election day. But momentum is a very important way of assessing how a campaign is going, because when Voters like to say that they voted for the winner. And when they see someone leading and pulling ahead, they start to, others start to join that parade. That is what we're seeing with Kamala Harris, is she has absolutely stopped Trump's momentum. Trump had enormous momentum against Biden, particularly after the president's dreadful debate performance. Harris comes in. Yes, she's been vice president for almost 4 years, but she's a fresh face, kind of. In a way, she has the best of all possible worlds in that she represents change from Biden, but she also represents some continuity, and she can take credit for some of his achievements, such as a booming job market. So the conventional wisdom isn't always right. It's a snapshot, just like the polls, but it's not always wrong either. And if you look at the polls in particularly the battleground states, Harris absolutely is in this game in a way that President Biden was not.
So if all that is true, let's telescope out for a second. Despite this new conventional wisdom, the numbers also suggest something else. Donald Trump is doing better in polls at this point of the election campaign today than he was doing against Hillary Clinton in 2016. And he lost to Biden, but he's better today than he was against Joe Biden 4 years ago. How do we factor that historical reality in with the contemporary reality? Daniel?
Well, in 2016, September and October were unusual months in that campaign. You had an October surprise in terms of a letter from the head of the FBI, James Comey, saying he was reopening an investigation that wrapped in Hillary Clinton's emails and whether there was classified information on them. And that was he only cleared her a couple days before the actual election day. And so there was lots of voters who were saying, hey, is she going to get charged with a crime? I don't like this messy business. And so that dragged her down a lot. And so I don't think, unless we see something similar here, then the poll numbers may not, reflect that. And I think back in 2016, what was interesting is that there was a lot of people who who did not even want to tell pollsters they were voting for Trump. And so because they were embarrassed. Now that is no longer the case. But you're seeing Trump really have struggles to get those suburban voters, those swing voters, those independents who want him to focus on policy instead of focusing on personal attacks. But he sometimes gets in his own way.
So just on that last point, do we know that issue of polls not wanting to divulge that they're really going into the booth and secretly casting a ballot for Donald Trump? Do we know that issue has been taken care of in polling?
Well, it's unclear because we haven't seen the election yet, but I think people have started to get less embarrassed about voting for Trump. He's now the establishment. Before, he used to be seen as this entertainer, this TV host. But now I think that the problem he faces is that he has a ceiling of around 46%, where it's very hard for him to persuade people who voted against him in 2016 or 2020. And so he has a very strong base. But you need to really win those 70,000 swing voters in those 3 or 4 states to actually make yourself win.
All right, we have 2 gentlemen, one lovely lady. I want to ask you about the gender gap, which in this race is evidently the widest gap of male-female preferences for presidential candidates in modern times. Why do men love Trump and women love Kamala Harris? Anna?
It's almost like it's just a natural inclination, I think, to understand as a woman that a woman understands the issues I go through better than a man would. So I think the same would go for men. He's a man's man. Kamala Harris is a woman. But certainly there's going to be plenty of women who choose to vote for Donald Trump and vice versa. And I was at a Kamala Harris rally in Georgia, a big battleground state, and women of all ages were there. But I would say just as many men were in attendance, nearly 10,000 people packed inside the arena. And so I think Kamala Harris's message of freedom, a lot of times it has to do with abortion and reproductive rights, is something that really resonates with women. But we're seeing more men who are supportive of that and are concerned about that as an election issue.
Todd, I mean, I've seen numbers as high as 16-point differential between men and women in this election. That's pretty remarkable.
It is remarkable. I mean, as Anna said, there are people of both genders who support each of the candidates, but it is a gap. Men are frankly who Trump has been trying most to appeal to, or people, maybe not men per se, but if you look back at the Republican convention, it was so infused with testosterone. You have, professional wrestlers ripping off their shirt, and it was just all about smash mouth, in your face, very masculine oriented, aggressive politics. And there's a traditional gender gap in that, I don't get myself in trouble, but democratic issues, the things that they talk about, are more nurturing to caregivers and helping people take care of their aging parents or helping you pay for your prescriptions. And Republicans traditionally, although not Trump, have been more about the more traditionally masculine, protect the country through being warriors kind of ethos. So that's always been an underlying, ongoing theme in American politics. It's just really exaggerated right now. And you can't overlook the fact that Kamala Harris would be the first female president. Hillary Clinton fell short. She put a lot of cracks in the glass ceiling, as she said. But Harris has a terrific chance to break through that barrier. She's the first female vice president, and there's an asymmetrical excitement about her candidacy because she is a woman of color and because she is a woman, and that excitement that sparked almost really immediately as soon as Biden dropped out and she became, and the Democrats gathered around behind her and she became the nominee. We haven't seen this kind of excitement in this election cycle until Harris became the Democratic candidate. There was an enormous amount of distaste for a rematch between Trump and Biden. And this is, even though she's been in office as vice president for almost 4 years, this is something that would be dramatically different. She hasn't been president yet. We've never had a woman president yet.
I have to say, I loved watching you struggle with trying to navigate the culture wars of this discussion, but you did very well. But Daniel, Todd underscores the newness of the Harris campaign, first woman to be president, perhaps, first Black woman, but she doesn't talk about that a lot. Is that a lesson that she learned from Hillary Clinton?
Yeah, I think she understands that Americans and voters who are making up their minds on this election, that they know that she'd be the first female president. And so she doesn't have to hit themselves over the head with it, that she can just talk about how she's for people of every gender and every race, and that she is fighting for middle-class families. The fact that she was the first female vice president, that broke a huge glass ceiling, and the world didn't end. And so men, I think, are more comfortable with that. And of course, there's going to be some men who vote against her because she's a woman. But I think that's a pretty small minority of people. Even if the Democrat was a man, those Trump voters would still vote for Trump. They're not going to switch parties because of that. But I think we saw the first Black president. And so those prejudices have started to melt away.
So that's a good, hopeful conclusion when you look at when you look at the the picture.
Yeah, no, I think it's, America, there's a reason that millions of people try to come to the country every year, sometimes through the border where we've, without proper authorization, because America is still seen as the land of opportunity, that anything is possible. And women are 50% of the population. There's been dozens of presidents. We've never had a woman president. And there's still major gender gaps in terms of the Senate and the House, and governors not being more heavily male. And so I think she would inspire lots of women, both in Democratic and Republican politics, to say, hey, I can be president, or I can be a senator too.
Anna, earlier on, you referred to the issue of border security and how it got transformed in this so far in the Harris-Trump campaign, with Harris being able to almost take it as one of hers. But generally, she doesn't focus too much on issues, and she's focusing on the theme of joy and optimism. And for his part, Donald Trump, his advisors can't get him to focus on issues either. He's always straying into personal tirades or grievances. But there are so many important issues out there. Why aren't our candidates talking about them?
There are, right? Aside from border security and immigration, there's, a dozen issues that voters, regularly say, this is the issue I'm showing up at the polls for in November. I think, for one thing, Trump's losing clout on the border, because the crisis that we saw, under Biden, we've seen more than 10 million migrants encountered at the nation's borders in 3.5 years. That's more than any two-term president in 8 years in history. We've seen those numbers diminish. Last December, we saw 250,000 people arrested, so for crossing illegally at the southern border. In July, we saw less than 60,000. So we're getting a lot closer to that 30 to 50,000 a month sort of norm that we've seen over the past decade or so. But if you don't have that issue, it's really hard for Republicans to go on TV and say the border crisis is out of control, when you're just not seeing that. Everything's settled down. Even in cities like New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, where we saw so many migrants arriving every day for 2 years, you're not seeing those people in need of help. You're not seeing those people living on the streets or in shelters. And so it takes away some of that clout. And the bonus is Kamala Harris can say, yeah, I was the border czar. I was responsible for addressing root causes from Central America that prompts migrants to flee. And hey, we've seen some results based on these numbers. So it's helping the Harris campaign, and it's also hurting the Trump campaign, because this is really an issue where if there was still a crisis, he could really be hitting the Harris administration harder, but he doesn't have that opportunity right now.
And if there's one theme that you expect to hear a lot more about, Todd, a serious policy issue, what do you think that will be?
Well, I mean, notwithstanding, Anna makes all the right points about the border issue has been effectively neutralized by events and by a very serious, effective crackdown by the Biden administration that's really undermined Trump's policies. But boy, he is going to keep hammering that, because that is, he knows that kind of tactic to be effective with his base and getting people to the polls. He is going to keep talking about his promise to do mass roundups and deportations. The people who that will alienate, the voters who will be turned off by that, were never going to vote for him anyway. And it could possibly drive up excitement in his own base. I don't really expect any new I have a solution to end the war in Gaza or the war in Ukraine kind of policy from either of them. Trump, of course, has promised that all bad things in the world will end the moment he takes office, or even the moment he's elected. Harris, likewise, some of the policies that Anna and Daniel have talked about, and you have talked about, are kind of incremental policies. It's what I think it was Bill Clinton used to talk about small ball, not going for a home run, not, hitting for the fences, but little things that add up together into a mosaic of policies that people might like. Tax breaks for capital gains tax, subsidies for small businesses to get off the ground. Nothing that is revamping the country in some scary way that feeds into Trump's attack that she's Comrade Kamala, a communist who's going to turn the country into the Soviet Republic of America. Nothing scary, but things that would be appealing as pocketbook issues. And it has been incredibly effective, between the fact that she would be the first woman of color. This joy theme is sort of a metaphor for that. Harris has stopped the momentum, and particularly in the swing states. I think Daniel said about 70,000 swing voters in a handful of states are going to decide that. That's about right. The latest polls show about 1 in 7 voters in a half dozen states, so 15% of the voters in 6 states are undecided. And those states were so close last time around that it was a margin of 43,000 votes one way or the other could have decided it. This is a razor-thin election, and they're not really so much appealing to the middle as trying to drive up excitement on their side.
All right. After we come back from the break, Daniel, I'm going to ask you to remind us about that other guy who's out there. We do actually have a president of the United States named Joe Biden, and what role he might play in the final weeks to November 5th. In just a moment. All right, Daniel, Joe Biden, President of the United States. He was the Democratic candidate until just a few weeks ago. What role has he played, and what role do we expect him to play as we get closer to the election?
Well, he's talked about how he's going to be on the sidelines, and so he's not going to be on the trail every single day. He's only so far done one campaign rally for Harris, and that was in Pennsylvania on Labor Day a few days ago. And what was interesting about this rally is that he only talked about Harris at the end a little bit. For most of his speech at this rally, he was talking about his own accomplishments and everything he's done, and he veered into family stories of his ancestors. And so you have to wonder if you're the Harris campaign, you probably want him to stick more closely to why Harris should be elected and not just recite what he did. But I think he will be deployed in some of those Rust Belt states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan to try to appeal to those white voters, some of those older men, elderly voters, because Harris is from California. And there's a reason she picked Tim Walz as well, the governor of Minnesota, to try to appeal to people who are not part of the kind of diverse elements of the Democratic Party and get some of those Reagan Democrats back into the fold.
So we may see more of Joe Biden just because she wants people to remind them, I'm almost 30 years younger than he is, or 20 years younger for sure. Yeah. All right. Fascinating. Daniel Lippman, Anna Giratelli, Todd Gilman. Thank you all very much for joining me this week on Dakhel, Washington. وصلنا إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كانت لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول موضوع هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول تأثير المناظرات التلفزيونية أثناء الحملة الانتخابية، أرجو التواصل معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو مراسلتي مباشرة @RobSatloff. أراكم في الأسبوع المقبل وحتى ذلك الحين شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.